I'm Catherine, 34 female. I live in a quiet city apartment with my fiancé, Matthew, and I work as a financial analyst, a job that I love because it's all about logic and numbers, where everything has to add up. For most of my life, however, I played a very different role. I was the unofficial bank for my family, and in their ledger, nothing ever seemed to add up except for what I was giving out. This is the story of how I finally audited their long history of entitlement and decided, once and for all, to close the account. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. For as long as I can remember, my family's financial ecosystem has revolved around a single, stable entity, me. It didn't start overnight. It was a gradual erosion of boundaries, a slow creep of expectations that began in my late teens and solidified into an unwritten rule by the time I was in my mid-20s. I was the responsible one, the one who got good grades, went to a good college on scholarships, and landed a stable, well-paying job right after graduation. To my family, my success wasn't a personal achievement, it was a collective resource. I wasn't just Catherine, their daughter and sister. I was the bank of Catherine, open 24/7 with a very generous, interest-free lending policy. My father, Isaac, is a man whose pride is as thick as the grease that used to be permanently embedded under his fingernails. He was a mechanic, a good one, but he ran his small shop with more heart than business sense. He retired a few years ago, and his pension was modest. He'd often talk about the good old days when a man's hard work was enough, subtly implying that my work, sitting at a desk and moving numbers around on a screen, was somehow less real, yet paradoxically, the source of very real money he often needed. My mother, Olivia, works part-time at the local library. She's quiet, gentle, and an expert at wielding guilt with surgical precision. She never demanded money directly. Instead, she'd sigh softly over the phone, talking about a leaky roof or a car that was making a funny noise again, always ending with, "Oh, but don't you worry about us, dear. We'll figure something out." It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation, and for years, I fell for it every single time. Then there's my brother, Peter. 7 years younger than me, Peter is an aspiring musician. In our family's lore, he is the creative genius, the free spirit who couldn't be tied down by a 9-to-5 job. In reality, he was a 29-year-old who lived in our parents' basement, writing half-finished songs and working odd jobs just long enough to afford new guitar strings before quitting. His financial emergencies were the most frequent and the most dramatic. There was the time he needed $2,000 for a once-in-a-lifetime music workshop in another state, which he came back from with nothing but a hangover. Or the $1,500 to replace stolen equipment, though I never saw a police report. Each time, I'd get a call, a whirlwind of panic and promises, and I'd transfer the money. He'd thank me profusely, swear he'd pay me back as soon as his big break came, and then the cycle would repeat. The loans were never paid back, not a single one. When I was younger, I tried to keep track. I had a little notebook where I'd jot down the date, the amount, and the reason. $500 dad, new tires. $800 mom, dental work. $1,200 Peter, rent. After a few years, the notebook had more entries than my personal diary. Looking at it filled me with such a mix of resentment and shame that I eventually threw it away. It felt easier to pretend they were gifts. But they were. They were transactions where I gave away my hard-earned money and, in return, received a temporary reprieve from the guilt and pressure. My fiancé, Matthew, was the first person to gently question this dynamic. He's a software engineer, a man who sees the world in logical systems. When he saw the constant financial drain, he didn't see family support. He saw a flawed system with a critical bug. "Honey," he said one evening after I just sent my dad $600 for a new water heater, "you know this isn't normal, right? You're funding their entire lives. What's their plan?" I got defensive, of course. "It's just what you do for family," I'd say. But he had planted a seed of doubt. He never pushed, but he'd ask quiet questions. "Did Peter ever pay you back for that recording software? Did your parents mention how they're managing their retirement funds?" He wasn't being accusatory, he was being an analyst just like me. He was pointing out that the numbers didn't add up. The cabin was the family's crown jewel. It was a small, rustic A-frame my grandfather had built by a lake about 2 hours from the city. It was my favorite place in the world as a child. Its smell of pine needles and old wood smoke. It was where I learned to swim, where Dad taught me how to fish, and where Mom would read stories by the fire. It represented the best of us, a time before my achievements became their safety net, before every family gathering felt like a precursor to a withdrawal request. The cabin was technically in my parents' name, a part of their very small inheritance. But over the years, I had become its primary benefactor. I paid for the new roof a few years back. I covered the cost of a new boat motor for the little fishing skiff. I paid the annual property taxes more than once when my parents forgot. To them, the cabin was a treasured family heirloom. To me, it was becoming just another line item on my ever-expanding list of familial expenses. It was the one place I should have felt at peace, but it was starting to feel like the most expensive property I never owned, a symbol of a relationship that was hopelessly out of balance. The foundation was rotting, both literally and figuratively, and I was the only one trying to hold it all up. The call came on a Tuesday evening. It was a chilly autumn night, and Matthew and I were curled up on the sofa, planning our wedding. We were debating color schemes and guest lists, a rare moment of pure, uncomplicated happiness. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, flashing a picture of my mom. I felt a familiar, low-level thrum of anxiety. A call from my mom after 8 p.m. was rarely just to chat. "Hi, Mom," I answered, trying to keep my voice light. "Catherine, honey," she began, her voice strained and thin. It was her catastrophe voice. "I'm so sorry to bother you. Is this a bad time?" It was never a good time, but that was part of the script. "No, it's fine. What's wrong? You sound upset." It's the cabin," she said, her voice cracking on the last word. My stomach tightened. "We got a letter, a final notice. The bank, they made a mistake with our mortgage years ago, and now there's this balloon payment. We owe them $20,000, Catherine. We have to pay it in 30 days or they're going to foreclose. We're going to lose the cabin." The line went silent, but I could hear her shaky breaths. $20,000. The number hung in the air, so large and specific it sounded absurd. I pictured the cabin, the sun setting over the lake, the sound of loons in the morning. The thought of it being taken away, sold off to strangers, sent a genuine pang of grief through me. That was her genius. She always knew exactly which heartstrings to pull. 20,000, I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. How is that possible? I thought the cabin was paid off years ago. We thought so too. My dad's voice suddenly boomed on the line. He must have been on speakerphone. It's these crooked banks. They lure you in, then pull the rug out from under you. It's a disgrace. His voice was full of righteous anger, a convenient mask for what I suspected was years of financial mismanagement. "Your father is just devastated," Mom added, her voice now a tearful murmur. "That place is his whole life, his father's legacy. He hasn't slept since we got the letter." I could hear Peter in the background, his voice muffled but distinct. "Just tell her, Mom, she has the money, she'll help us." There it was, the blunt, unvarnished truth of their expectations. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. I looked over at Matthew. He was watching me, his expression a mixture of concern and practiced neutrality. He could see the storm gathering. $20,000 was a huge amount of money, even for me. We were saving for our wedding, for a down payment on a house of our own. It wasn't just sitting in a checking account, waiting to be deployed for the latest family crisis. I don't know," I stammered. "That's a lot of money. I'd have to move things around, sell some investments." "If you really cared about this family, you'd find a way," my mom said, the gentle librarian's voice replaced by something cold and sharp. The mask had slipped. "Think of all the memories we have there. Are you really going to let that all disappear for a number on a bank statement?" "You'll give it to us." Peter's voice came through again, clearer this time, laced with a smug certainty that made my skin crawl. "You always do." He was right, I always did, I had always caved. The guilt, the pressure, the sheer exhaustion from fighting them was usually enough to make me open my wallet. But this time felt different. The amount was staggering. The timing, right when Matthew and I were building our own future, felt like a deliberate act of sabotage. And Peter's casual, arrogant confidence, it wasn't a plea for help. It was a demand for service. "Let me look into it," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "Send me a copy of the letter from the bank. I want to see what this is about." There was a brief, surprised silence on the other end. I had never asked for proof before. I had always just taken their word for it. "A copy," my dad grumbled. "What for? You don't trust us." "It's not about trust, Dad. It's about understanding the situation. I'm a financial analyst. Let me analyze it. Send me the paperwork and I'll see what I can do." "Fine," Mom said curtly. "I'll text you a picture of it in the morning. Just don't take too long, Catherine. The clock is ticking." They hung up and the silence in the apartment was deafening. I sank back into the couch, my head pounding. Matthew put his arm around me. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. "No," I said, the word coming out as a choked sob. "I'm not. I think I'm just a talking ATM to them." "Then maybe it's time the ATM was out of service," he replied, holding me tighter. "Let's see that letter. Let's see what the numbers really say." He was right. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to just accept the story I was told. I was going to read the fine print. And as I lay there, my happy evening in ruins, I had a sinking feeling that the story of the $20,000 debt was a work of fiction, and I was about to uncover a truth far uglier than any bank foreclosure. The promised picture of the bank letter didn't arrive the next morning. I woke up with a knot of dread in my stomach, checking my phone every few minutes. By noon, there was still nothing. I texted my mom, "Hey, just waiting on that picture of the letter when you have a chance." An hour later, she replied, "Sorry, honey, your father misplaced it. He's turning the house upside down looking for it. It's so stressful." Misplaced it. A final notice for a $20,000 debt that would cost them their most prized possession, and they had misplaced it. It was such a flimsy excuse that it was almost insulting. This was my first major red flag. In my world, a document like that would be kept in a fireproof safe, not lost in a pile of mail. I decided to do some preliminary digging on my own. I still had the property tax documents I'd paid for them 2 years ago, so I had the cabin's parcel number. Most county property records are public information, searchable online. I logged into the county assessor's website, my heart pounding a little. I typed in the number and waited for the page to load. The record came up instantly. It showed the property owners, Isaac and Olivia, the assessed value, and the tax history. I clicked on the tax history tab. Paid in full. In fact, they were paid up for the entire year, so it wasn't a tax lien. Next, I looked for mortgage information. The records showed the original mortgage, taken out 30 years ago, and a satisfaction of mortgage document filed and recorded 8 years ago. That meant the original loan was, as I'd always believed, paid off. There were no other liens or loans listed against the property. According to the official public record, the cabin was owned free and clear. There was no mortgage to foreclose on. I leaned back in my chair, a cold, calm certainty washing over me. They were lying. There was no balloon payment. There was no bank error. There was no threat of foreclosure. The entire story was a fabrication, a carefully crafted piece of theater designed to extract $20,000 from me. The question was, why? What did they really need the money for? A few days passed in a strange limbo. I didn't confront them with what I'd found. I wanted more information. I played along, texting my mom to ask if they'd found the letter yet. Each time, she had a new excuse. "Your father thinks he might have shredded it by accident. Can you believe it?" Or, "We called the bank, but they have us on hold for hours. They're giving us the runaround." It was a masterclass in deflection. The second crack in their story came from an unexpected source. My aunt, my dad's sister. I called her under the pretense of asking for an old family recipe. We chatted for a bit, and then I casually brought up the cabin. "I was just thinking about the cabin the other day," I said, trying to sound wistful. Mom and Dad are so worried about keeping it up." "Oh, keeping it up is the least of their worries," she said with a sigh. "Your father just bought himself that brand new pickup truck. I don't know how they're affording it on their retirement, but he's proud as a peacock. Said he was tired of driving that old clunker." A brand new pickup truck. I felt the air leave my lungs. A new truck? When did this happen? "Just last week," she said. "He brought it over to show us. It's one of those big ones, fully loaded, must have cost a fortune." A fortune? Maybe, say, the price of a hefty down payment? The pieces were starting to click into place, forming a picture of breathtaking deceit. They weren't about to lose something, they had already gained something. They had bought a luxury item they couldn't afford and had invented a crisis to have me pay for it. But it was Peter who delivered the final, damning piece of evide. NCE, he posted a picture on his private social media account. It was a picture of him, grinning, holding up a brand new, top-of-the-line electric guitar and a massive amplifier. The caption read, "New gear for the new album, big things coming soon. Thanks to the family for believing in the dream." The picture was geotagged. He was at a music store in the city. I knew the store. They specialized in high-end, professional equipment. The gear in that photo, I estimated, cost at least $5,000 to $7,000. I felt a surge of white-hot anger. It was my money. My money, earned through 60-hour work weeks and careful budgeting, was funding my brother's fantasy life while he lived rent-free in my parents' basement. The truck was for my dad's pride, the guitar was for my brother's hobby, and the lie about the cabin was the tool to make me pay for it all. The lie wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the complete and utter lack of respect they had for me. They saw me not as a person, but as a resource, an obstacle to be manipulated. They had leveraged my deepest emotional attachment, my love for the cabin and the memories it held, and twisted it into a weapon against me. They weren't just asking for a loan, they were committing emotional blackmail on a grand scale. That night, I told Matthew everything. I laid out the evidence, the clear property records, the new truck, the expensive music equipment. He listened patiently, his expression hardening with each detail. "I can't believe this," I whispered, the anger now giving way to a profound sadness. "How could they do this to me?" "Because you've always let them," he said, not unkindly. "You've been so generous for so long that they've forgotten where their responsibilities end and your kindness begins. They see your money as their money. This isn't a mistake, Catherine. This is their system, working as intended." He was right. This was their system. And I finally realized that a system so broken couldn't be fixed with another patch, another loan, another temporary fix. It had to be dismantled. The lies had unraveled, and in their place, a cold, hard truth remained. It was time for a full audit, not just of their finances, but of our entire relationship. And I was the only one who could do it. The discovery of the lies didn't just make me angry. It flipped a switch in my brain. The part of me that was the loving, dutiful daughter went quiet, and the part that was a meticulous financial analyst took over. For years, I had willfully ignored the glaring inconsistencies in my family's financial life. I had accepted their stories at face value because the alternative, admitting they were using me, was too painful. Now, the pain of the truth was less than the pain of the deception. It was time to run the numbers. I started by digging through my old bank statements online. I went back 5 years, then 7, then 10. I created a new spreadsheet, a document that would become the cornerstone of my plan. It had 4 columns: date, recipient, amount, and stated reason. I spent hours, night after night, combing through a decade of my financial life. Each transfer to my parents or my brother was a small wound I had forgotten. Seeing them all together was staggering. There was the $3,000 for the emergency roof repair on their house, a repair that I now suspected was a planned renovation. There was the $2,500 for Dad's unexpected medical bills, which was strange because I knew he had decent insurance through his old union. There was an endless stream of smaller amounts to Peter. $500 for a car repair, $300 for a utility bill, $800 for a rental deposit on an apartment he never moved into. The stated reason column was a litany of crises, bad luck, and unforeseen circumstances. But as I cross-referenced the dates with my own memory and old emails, I started to see patterns. The emergencies often coincided with holidays or their vacations. The $1,500 for a new furnace in October was transferred just 2 weeks before my parents took a cruise to the Caribbean. The urgent plea for money to fix a plumbing disaster came just before Peter bought front-row tickets to a music festival. The total was sickening. Over the past 10 years, I had given them over $94,000. $94,000. The number stared back at me from the screen, cold and stark. It was the down payment on a house. It was a healthy retirement fund. It was a future I had handed over, piece by piece, in exchange for a hollow sense of familial duty. And not 1 cent had ever been repaid. The promises of "I'll get you back next month," or "this is the last time," I swear, were as fake as the crisis about the cabin. But I wasn't done. I needed this to be airtight. My job had taught me that a solid case is built on irrefutable documentation. I printed every bank statement with a highlighted transfer. I found old emails where I had confirmed sending the money and they had confirmed receiving it, complete with their dramatic tales of woe. I even found a few birthday cards from my mom where she'd written things like, "Thank you for always being there for us. We don't know what we'd do without your help." In any other context, they would be sweet. Now, they read like receipts for services rendered. The most damning evidence came from my old phone. I had an old text thread with Peter I'd never deleted. In it, he asked for $1,000 to fix his car so he could get to a job interview. 2 days after I sent the money, he posted a picture on social media of himself and his friends on a weekend trip to a ski resort. I scrolled back and found the picture, took a screenshot, and printed it. I did the same for 3 other instances, matching his pleas for cash with his subsequent recreational spending. I compiled everything into a single, thick folder. On the front, I affixed a label, "The Isaac and Olivia Family Fund, a 10-year audit." It felt cold and corporate, and that was exactly the point. They had treated our relationship like a business transaction for years, with me as the sole investor and them as the non-performing asset. It was time for a shareholder meeting. Matthew watched me work, a quiet and constant source of support. He didn't fuel my anger, but he validated my resolve. He'd bring me coffee as I worked late into the night, sitting beside me in silence as I sifted through years of financial debris. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked one night, looking at the formidable stack of paper on our dining table. "This is going to be explosive." "I know," I said, my voice steady. "But if I don't, this will be my life forever. Every bonus I get, every promotion, will just mean a bigger crisis from them. We'll never be able to build our own life because I'll always be renovating theirs. This isn't just about the $20,000 anymore. It's about the next 20 years. He nodded, understanding completely. "What's the final step?" "The final step," I said, closing the folder, "is a dinner invitation. I'm going to invite them over this weekend. I'll tell them I've made a decision about the cabin." My plan was no longer just about saying no. A simple no would be met with arguments, guilt, and emotional warfare. They would wear me down as they always had. No, this required a different strategy. I wasn't going to just decline their request. I was going to present my findings. I was going to show them the numbers, the patterns, the lies. I was going to give them a full, detailed accounting of their decade of deception. The Bank of Catherine wasn't just closing a withdrawal request, it was liquidating all assets and shutting its doors for good. The audit was complete. All that was left was the final presentation. With audit complete and the evidence compiled, the next phase was about strategy. I couldn't just walk into a room and start yelling. My family, particularly my mother, were masters of derailing logical arguments with emotional outbursts. If I showed anger, they would label me as hysterical. If I showed hurt, they would call me overly sensitive. My only weapon was the one they never expected me to use: cold, hard, dispassionate logic. The same skill set I used to analyze corporate balance sheets, I would now apply to my own family. My plan needed a setting. It had to be on my turf, a neutral ground where I controlled the environment. Our apartment was perfect. It was a space they associated with my success, a place that subtly reminded them of the life I had built for myself, separate from them. I decided on a Saturday evening dinner. It was civilized. It was disarming. They would arrive expecting a negotiation, assuming their usual tactics of guilt and pressure would eventually lead to my capitulation. They would be walking into an ambush, cloaked in hospitality. I called my mom to extend the invitation. "Hi, Mom," I said, my voice deliberately cheerful. "Matthew and I would love to have you, Dad, and Peter over for dinner on Saturday. We can talk about the cabin situation then. I've had some time to think about it." "Oh, that's wonderful, dear," she chirped, the relief in her voice palpable. She clearly interpreted this as a sign of my imminent surrender. "We'd love to. What time?" We set the time, and I hung up, a strange sense of calm settling over me. The decision had been made. The plan was in motion. There was no more anxiety, no more wavering. There was only the quiet hum of purpose. I spent the next 2 days preparing not just the meal, but my presentation. Matthew and I role-played the conversation. He played the parts of my father, mother, and brother, mimicking their tactics with unnerving accuracy. He threw their greatest hits at me, the angry accusations from Isaac, the tearful guilt trips from Olivia, and the entitled whining from Peter. It was emotionally draining, but it was necessary. It was like a stress test for my resolve. With each practice run, my arguments became sharper, my voice steadier, and my emotional armor thicker. The centerpiece of my plan was the folder, the audit. But I needed something more, a final document that would serve as the conclusion of my presentation. I wasn't just closing the bank, I was issuing a final statement. I sat down at my computer and began to type. I titled the document, "Loan Reconciliation and Future Financial Policy." It sounded like something from a corporate HR department, and that was intentional. The document had 2 parts. Part 1 was a summary of the spreadsheet. It listed the grand total, $94, $750, and broke it down by recipient. $41,200 to Isaac and Olivia, and $53,550 to Peter. It stated, in clear and unambiguous terms, that this amount was considered a debt, as it was given under the promise of repayment. I then attached a promissory note, a legally formatted document, for the full amount. It outlined a repayment plan, a symbolic $100 a month, not because I ever expected to see the money, but to legally reframe the decade of gifts as the loans they were purported to be. It was a move to reclaim the narrative. Part 2 was the future financial policy. It was a single, powerful paragraph. It stated that, effective immediately, I would no longer be providing any form of non-emergency financial support to my parents or my brother. All requests for money, co-signing of loans, or payment of bills would be politely declined. It defined emergency in the strictest possible terms, a life-threatening medical situation not covered by insurance. It clarified that job loss, car trouble, poor planning, or discretionary purchases did not constitute an emergency. It was a declaration of independence, a constitution for a new, healthier relationship with firm and immovable boundaries. I printed 3 copies of the document and 3 copies of the promissory note. I placed them in 3 separate manila envelopes. These, along with the main folder of evidence, would be my tools for the confrontation. The night before the dinner, a wave of sadness washed over me. I wasn't just preparing for an argument, I was preparing for a funeral. I was about to bury the idealized version of the family I had always wanted. The family that supported each other out of love, not obligation. The family where my success was celebrated, not just drawn upon like a bank account. Matthew found me sitting in the dark, holding one of the envelopes. "Second thoughts?" he asked gently. "No," I said, shaking my head. "Just mourning, I guess. It's sad that it has to come to this. Why couldn't they just be happy for me? Why did it always have to be about what I could do for them?" Because some people are so stuck in their own hole, they can't see the P. Our son holding the ladder, he said. They just see the rungs as a way out. This isn't your fault, Catherine. You're not ending the family. You're just ending the arrangement. You're giving them a chance to finally be a real family, one that isn't based on your bank balance. He was right. I was offering them a new deal, a relationship based on love and respect, not money. The price of admission was simply that they had to start taking responsibility for themselves. I had drafted the final statement. Now, all that was left was to see if they were willing to accept the terms. I tucked the envelopes into the folder and went to bed, feeling a profound sense of closure. The past was audited. The future was about to be written. Saturday arrived with a cold, clear sky. I spent the day cooking a meal that was far too elaborate for the occasion: a roasted chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds. The familiar, comforting act of cooking was a balm to my frayed nerves. It was the last act of the old Catherine, the one who tried to smooth things over with food and generosity. By the time my family arrived at 7 o'clock sharp, the apartment smelled of rosemary and home, a deceptive prelude to the emotional demolition I had planned. They came in bearing cheap wine and wide smiles, the picture of a happy family visiting for dinner. My dad, Isaac, clapped me on the shoulder, a little too heartily. "Smells great in here, Kat. Knew you'd come around." My mom, Olivia, gave me a hug, whispering, "Thank you for doing this, honey. It means the world to us." Peter just grunted a hello and immediately started scrolling on his phone, already bored. They were so confident, so utterly sure of the outcome. Their arrogance was a bucket of cold water on my last flickering embers of doubt. We made it through dinner with strained, small talk. They complimented the food. I asked about Dad's retirement, Mom's library job, Peter's music. It was a dance of denial, a performance of normalcy over a chasm of resentment. I let them lead, letting them believe they were in control. Matthew was a rock, engaging in the conversation just enough to keep it from collapsing, his calm presence a silent signal of his support for me. Finally, as I cleared the dessert plates, my mom broached the subject. "So, Catherine," she said, folding her hands on the table, "about the cabin, we're just so grateful you're willing to help." This was it, showtime. I sat back down, took a deep breath, and placed the large, labeled folder on the center of the table. It landed with a soft, heavy thud that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. 3 pairs of eyes locked onto it. "I'm not going to help with the cabin," I said, my voice even and calm. "Because there's nothing wrong with the cabin. I know there's no balloon payment, no foreclosure notice, and no debt. The property is owned free and clear." The silence was immediate and absolute. My dad's folksy smile froze and hardened. My mom's soft expression turned to one of confusion, then alarm. Peter actually looked up from his phone. "What are you talking about?" Dad blustered, his voice rising. "Of course there is, we got a letter." "No, you didn't," I replied, my gaze unwavering. "I checked the county records. The mortgage was satisfied 8 years ago, but you know what isn't paid for? Your new truck, Dad, or your new music equipment, Peter." Peter's face went pale. Mom shot him a panicked look. Dad slammed his fork down on the table, the clatter making us all jump. "You think you're better than us because you have money now?" he snarled, his face turning red. "You go behind our backs, spying on us." "I didn't have to spy," I said, my voice still level. "You weren't exactly hiding it. This isn't about me thinking I'm better than you. This is about you lying to me to get $20,000. If you really cared about family, you'd lend us the money so we don't lose the cabin." Mom sneered, her voice dripping with venom. The librarian was gone, replaced by a cornered animal. My brother laughed, a short, ugly sound. "She'll give it to us, she always does." I leaned back in my chair, just as I had rehearsed in my mind. I gave them a small, sad smile. "Not this time." Then I opened the folder. "This," I announced, "is a 10-year audit of what I'm calling the Isaac and Olivia Family Fund, also known as my personal bank account." I pulled out the first document, the summary spreadsheet. I turned it around so they could see the columns, the dates, the reasons, and the horrifying total at the bottom. Over the past decade, I have given the three of you $94,750. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My dad stared, his jaw slack. I have records of every transfer, I continued, pulling out a thick stack of printed bank statements. Every email, every text message asking for help. Help for emergencies that strangely coincided with vacations, new gadgets, and concert tickets. I slid the screenshots of Peter's social media posts across the table. His grinning face next to his new guitar, posted just days after he'd begged me for money for a leaking pipe in the basement. His expression curdled from arrogance to sheer panic. This entire relationship has been a transaction, I said, my voice finally beginning to tremble, not with weakness, but with the force of a decade of suppressed truth. You saw my success not as something to be proud of, but as a resource to be exploited. You used my love for you and my love for that cabin as emotional blackmail. I then pulled out the 3 manila envelopes and slid one in front of each of them. This is my final statement. Inside, you will find a promissory note for your share of the $94,000 you have borrowed, and you will find a document outlining my new financial policy. Which is this? The bank is closed. Permanently. My dad stood up so fast his chair screeched against the floor. This is insane. You're our daughter, you owe us. I owe you nothing, I said, standing to face him. I have paid my dues. I have funded your lives, your hobbies, and your poor decisions for 10 years. That ends tonight. My mom burst into tears, the loud, theatrical sobs she always used to get her way. How can you be so cruel, after everything we've done for you? But for the first time, her tears had no effect on me. I saw them for what they were, a tool, a performance. I looked at all of them, my family, their faces a mixture of rage, shock, and disbelief. They weren't angry because I had hurt them. They were angry because I had cut off their supply. The dinner is over, I said quietly. I think it's time for you to leave. They didn't leave quietly. My father yelled, calling me ungrateful, cold-hearted, and a traitor to the family. My mother sobbed that I was destroying them, that I had no idea how hard their lives were. Peter, surprisingly, was silent, his face ashen as he stared at the promissory note with his name and a number over $50,000 on it. He seemed to be the only one who grasped the sheer, irreversible finality of the moment. They stormed out, leaving the envelopes untouched on the table, a testament to their complete refusal to accept the new reality. The moment the door slammed shut, the adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins vanished, leaving me shaky and exhausted. I sank onto a chair, burying my face in my hands. Matthew was there instantly, his arms wrapping around me. I didn't cry. I felt strangely hollow, as if I had just completed a painful but necessary surgery. I had amputated a toxic part of my life, and while the wound was fresh, I knew it was the only way to stop the poison from spreading. The days that followed were a barrage of emotional warfare. My mother left long, rambling voicemails, alternating between tearful pleas and bitter accusations. My father sent terse, angry texts demanding an apology. They tried to recruit other family members, but when my aunt called, I calmly explained the situation, and to my surprise, she said, "It's about time someone stood up to them." It turned out, I wasn't the only one they had tried to take advantage of. I was just the most successful target. Peter was the only one who tried a different approach. He showed up at my apartment a week later, looking haggard. He didn't yell. He tried to, appeal to our shared history, talking about our childhood, about the cabin. He apologized, sort of. "I know we shouldn't have lied," he said, "but we were desperate. You don't know what it's like to want something so bad, to have a dream, and not have the money to make it happen." "I do know, Peter," I told him, my voice soft but firm. "My dream was to have a family that loved me for who I am, not for what I could provide. I worked for my dream, I sacrificed, I studied, I put in the hours. You want to be a musician? Get a job, any job, and fund it yourself. That's how dreams are built, not by lying to your sister." He left without another word, the spark of entitlement in his eyes finally extinguished, replaced by a dawning, uncomfortable understanding. Matthew and I moved forward with our wedding plans. Without the constant threat of a financial emergency looming, a huge weight was lifted. We were able to increase the down payment we were saving for our house. We booked the venue we really wanted. For the first time, my financial future felt entirely my own, and it was exhilarating. About 2 months after the dinner, I learned through my aunt that my parents had put the cabin up for sale. The new truck and Peter's lifestyle had, as I suspected, put them into considerable debt, and with my support gone, they had no other way to cover it. The news gave me a sharp pang of sadness. I mourned the loss of the physical place, the repository of my happiest childhood memories. But then I realized the cabin I loved hadn't really existed for years. It had become a prop in their drama, a symbol of their manipulation. Its loss was just the final collateral damage of their choices. I didn't go to the closing. I didn't want to see it handed over to strangers. But my aunt told me it sold quickly to a young family who planned to use it every summer. I found a strange peace in that. The cabin would be filled with laughter and new memories again, free from the dark cloud of deceit that had settled over it. My relationship with my family is now one of distant, civil silence. I send them a polite card on Christmas and their birthdays. They don't call. The Bank of Catherine is permanently closed, its assets transferred to a new, more promising venture: my own life. Last weekend, Matthew and I put an offer on a house. It has a small yard and a big, sunny kitchen. As we signed the papers, I thought about the $94,000. I thought about how much easier this would have been with that money. But then I looked at Matthew, at the life we were building together, based on partnership, honesty, and mutual respect. I realized I had got something far more valuable in return for that money. I had bought my freedom. I had purchased my peace of mind. And that was an investment with a return that you could never put a number on. The account was settled, and for the first time, my books were perfectly and beautifully balanced.